I take the same route every single day in and out of the city. I don't live very far, just 30 or so minutes out in the quiet suburbs. The road I took was always peaceful at night, which was a great relief compared to the daytime traffic. I was driving on this road and everything was going just as it always did. It was a little past p.m. I was enjoying my music and feeling content as I neared home. Just 10 minutes away, I entered the woodsy area right before the suburbs. Suddenly, a light appeared up the road. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but as it approached, it became increasingly bright, almost blinding me. I had to intensely focus on the shoulder of the road to ensure I stayed in my lane. Just when I thought they were going to overtake me, I caught a glimpse of their tires in my lane. They were driving on the wrong side of the road, dangerously close to a head-on collision with me. Instinctively, my reflexes kicked in, and I quickly veered to the right, careening off the road and crashing into the ditch that ran alongside. The woods can be a place of mystery and intrigue. The dense foliage and towering trees create an atmosphere that is both enchanting and eerie. The rustling of leaves and the hooting of owls can send shivers down your spine. It's a place where the imagination can. It took me a few seconds to compose myself, but I didn't appear to be seriously injured. I unbuckled my seatbelt and swiftly exited the car. The damage was extensive. The front was completely torn off, and it seemed like a miracle that I survived. As I recalled what had happened, anger surged within me. I climbed out of the ditch and scanned the road ahead. To my surprise, the other vehicle had stopped and pulled over not too far away. Before approaching them, I quickly assessed my surroundings and realized how vulnerable we were. So, before confronting them, I hurried back to my car and retrieved my phone to call the police. I was unsure about the identity of the person in the car ahead. There was a possibility that they were intoxicated or enraged, so I decided to take precautions. The operator assured me that help would arrive in 5 minutes, so I ended the call and began making my way back up the ditch. However, my nerves were rattled when I suddenly noticed a man standing at the top. He didn't inquire about my well-being or utter a single word. "Are you the one responsible for causing my accident? You could have ended my life," I managed to say, attempting to restrain my anger until the authorities arrived. When he arrived, he remained silent. Default, however, the light from his car on the road suddenly intensified and approached his location. I was hiding in the ditch, but I could see that it was the same car with a different driver. They reversed the car right up to the edge of the ditch, and then the driver's door swung open, and the two of them began conversing in a foreign language. It sounded aggressive, possibly Russian or German, but I'm not proficient in languages. As they spoke, one of the men hurried to the back of the car and opened the trunk. Fixed. Instead of grabbing something, he turned to face me. Startled, both of them swiftly approached me, charging down into the ditch. In a flash, I quickly grasped the situation, and without hesitation, I pivoted and dashed into the dense woods, while the men frantically circled my car. LT text kept relentlessly pursuing me. They were both large and imposing figures, so after a frantic minute of running, I managed to elude them. Now I found myself deep in the heart of the dense woods, enveloped in complete darkness. Disoriented and unable to discern any sense of direction, I aimlessly wandered through the labyrinth of trees. The absence of any sounds from the men gave me a sliver of relief, but it didn't alleviate my anxiety. I didn't want to risk returning to the road while the men were still lurking, yet I also didn't want to venture too far and risk losing any chance of police assistance. After just a few minutes of walking, however, The distant wails of sirens reached my ears from the left. Text. Default TI followed the sound and found myself on the road, where I spotted a police car parked at the top of the ditch. 2 officers were examining my car, but there was no sign of the men I had encountered earlier. I recounted the events to the officers, and they took notes for their report. Ixed. However, the subsequent investigation was minimal, as they only had the description of the men to work with. Thankfully, nothing was stolen from my car, although it was quite obvious that the men had intended to abduct me. Whether this was their plan all along or a hasty decision after the crash remains unclear. Perhaps they made a mistake and were trying to cover it up, or maybe it was all just a series of unfortunate events. Text. Planned, I must admit. I am not the most experienced long-distance driver. In fact, I rarely venture beyond 30 minutes behind the wheel. However, due to work obligations, I found myself embarking on a daunting 10-hour journey from my quaint hometown of Broly to the bustling city of San Francisco, where our main office is located. Keep in mind, I had only been with the company for less than 6 months, working remotely up until this point. This was my first time tackling such a lengthy drive. To make matters worse, I didn't have the pleasure of taking the scenic California coastal highway. Instead, I had to navigate through the lesser-known highway on the opposite side of the state, traversing desolate deserts and smaller towns. Needless to say, this unfamiliar route added an extra layer of uncertainty to my already nerve-wracking adventure. I set out my GPS and started driving at 6:00 p.m. I wanted to ensure that I would arrive at the hotel by 3:00 p.m., right on time for check-in. The following day, as I embarked on my journey, the initial hour of the drive took me through my town. Gradually, the landscape transformed, with only a handful of buildings scattered here and there, until there was nothing but emptiness. Surprisingly, there were hardly any other vehicles on the road as well. After approximately 3 hours, I happened to pass by a gas station, which served as a timely reminder for me to check on the fuel level in my tank. I glanced at the meter and realized it was dangerously close to running out. The monotonous drive on the empty road had caused me to lose focus and neglect the fuel level. I foolishly assumed I could make it to the next gas station, but as the minutes ticked by without any sign of one, a sense of unease washed over me. How could I have been so careless to let myself run out of gas in the middle of a desert? The car began to sputter and jerk, confirming my worst fears. Just as I feared the engine would die any moment, I spotted headlights on the side of the road. It appeared to be a police car patrolling the highway. With no other options, I reluctantly pulled over and parked a short distance behind them. I was hoping they had a gas canister I could use. I got out and started walking up to their car. It had a spotlight by the driver's side mirror and a light bar on the roof, so from behind it looked like a police car. But as I got closer, doubts started creeping in. Regardless, I needed help, and I assumed they had to have seen me walking up by now. Anyway, as I approached the side of the car, it became apparent that it was a police car, although not one currently in service. It seemed to be an old one that someone had purchased after removing the police markings and other identifying features. Surprisingly, there was no one inside the car, but it didn't appear to be abandoned either. The interior looked relatively clean, and there was even a grocery bag on the passenger seat filled with what appeared to be food and snacks. However, something about this situation felt incredibly eerie. I glanced up and surveyed the surrounding desert, which was shrouded in darkness and mostly empty, save for a few stray cacti. It only took a moment for me to notice movement out there. The figure was quite far from the road, making it difficult to discern their actions, but there was definitely a person out there, moving about. Realizing that this situation was not going to end well, a sense of unease washed over me. The outcome was not what I anticipated. I was about to head back to my car and consider calling for help, but something chilling happened. The figure abruptly halted its movement and stood motionless, as if it had sensed my presence and was now fixated on me. Uncertain of what to do, I found myself frozen in place. Suddenly, the person began rushing towards the road. Seizing the opportunity, I sprinted back to my car. However, the man was incredibly fast, as by the time I reached the driver's seat, he was already standing by the road, waiting. A car suddenly appeared in front of me, its headlights illuminating a figure. The person had a menacing appearance, with short black hair and a dirty, sand-covered beard. Their presence sent chills down my spine, and I couldn't decipher their intentions. Frozen with fear, I hesitated to start my car, afraid that any noise would give away my vulnerability. Desperate for help, I repeatedly dialed 911, praying for a connection. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I managed to reach the authorities. In the meantime, the mysterious figure got into their car and vanished into the darkness, leaving me shaken and alone. It took 30 agonizing minutes for an officer to arrive, bringing some semblance of safety. I filled my car with gas and mentioned the man who seemed suspicious in the desert, but my concerns were dismissed. The person even made a joke about burying a body, treating it as a trivial matter. Despite feeling shaken, I didn't argue and continued my journey. It's been a while since then, but I can't help but dwell on what that man was up to and how close I may have been to uncovering something. My name is John, a 23-year-old working at a 24/7 bar in my town. Our bar is famous for its pizza and drinks, and despite the limited food options, people always seem to enjoy it. I've never quite understood why the owners decided to add pizza delivery to our services. It's a lot of hassle for what I assume is not much extra money. Nevertheless, since we rarely receive delivery orders, I was always the sole driver during the PM to AM shift. As I walked into the bar that night, I was taken aback by the overwhelming crowd. Numerous large groups had gathered, and with deliveries being slow, I found myself assisting with waiting tables in the meantime. There were only a few deliveries to make, maybe once an hour, and even at 3 a.m. There was another routine delivery for me to make. I picked up the single pizza and hopped into my car. The destination was about 15 minutes away, so I entered the address into Google Maps and began my drive. Everything was going smoothly up until this point, just another ordinary delivery. I must admit, I was relieved to escape the bustling bar and find solace on the peaceful roads. However, my tranquility was abruptly shattered when Google Maps unexpectedly announced that I had arrived at my destination. Confused, I pulled over to the side of the road, trying to make sense of where I had ended up. Incorrect, but verifying every detail. This address was listed on the order, supposedly leading to the entrance of a forest preserve or park. Surprisingly, there were no houses in the vicinity that could have caused a mix-up. I decided to call the customer's number, and to my surprise, they answered almost immediately. "Hey, this is John. I'm attempting to deliver your pizza, but it seems like you've provided us with the wrong address." There was an eerie silence that followed. As I strained to listen, the sound of heavy breathing filled the phone. The caller proceeded to provide a detailed description of my car and instructed me to look to my left. Following his instructions, I turned my gaze and was met with an eerie sight, an endless expanse of darkness, a dense forest devoid of any light. Suddenly, a movement caught my eye. It was the caller, frantically waving his arms in an attempt to grab my attention. He stood there, lurking in the shadows of the forest, just beyond the road. I couldn't help but wonder why he didn't simply approach from the roadside. It was easier to understand or even comprehend why he chose to order it here in the first place. As I stepped out and began my walk, I couldn't help but notice the unsettling silence that enveloped the area near the forest preserve. There were no signs of life, no cars, no people. It was an eerie atmosphere that sent shivers down my spine. It was quite strange that as I approached, the man remained completely still, not making a single movement. Didn't meet me halfway, he just stood there and watched me walk across the street and up to the grass just before the edge of the forest where he was at. I stopped halfway through the grass, realizing this was getting really weird. I waved him over to come grab the pizza and pay for it. The guy hesitated, and instead of as he approached me, his gaze shifted behind me and to either side, clearly searching for any potential onlookers. My nerves began to tingle. I was feeling quite unsettled at this point, which made it difficult to think clearly. If my mind was clear, I would have immediately headed for my car, and I hurriedly departed before I could regain my composure. A man began to advance towards me, his pace quickening without any signs of slowing down. I instinctively stepped back, but my movement was futile. The man firmly grasped my upper arm, forcefully pulling me backwards. In the depths of the eerie forest, he made a desperate attempt to silence his movements, not uttering a single word. His sole focus was on pushing me away, engaging in a fierce struggle that lasted for what felt like an eternity. It dawned on me that escape was futile, prompting me to unleash a flurry of punches in a desperate bid for freedom. Instead, it only took a few precise shots to his face before he released his grip. By then, we were just a few feet away from the dense forest. I sprinted away, glancing back only to see if he was in pursuit. To my dismay, he rose to his feet and disappeared into the depths of the forest. However, my terror intensified when two other individuals emerged from behind the trees. Without hesitation, I jumped into my car and sped away without looking back. I hurried to the police station on the other side of the block, but unfortunately, the culprits had already made their escape. After that, I returned to work and explained the unsettling incident to my boss. After inquiring about the man's order, all he could provide was a phone number that had already been disconnected and a first name that seemed suspiciously fake. As a result, he sent me home early with a complimentary slice of pizza that wasn't exactly a fair exchange. I couldn't really complain. If I had been foolish enough to venture into the forest that night, I would have likely been ambushed by all three men without any witnesses. Fortunately, my hesitation to approach them made it easier for me to escape the altercation, but it easily could have escalated into something much more terrifying.